Welcome to BergKnifemaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how I made this shipwreck themed chef's knife. Now, a very good friend of mine, Rob Wyanacki, commissioned me to make a knife. He's an avid shipwreck diver, and one of his favorite shipwrecks is the RMS Oregon, which was sunk back in 1886. So when he asked me to make a knife, I wanted to do something, a little special for him. And there's two main aspects of this particular knife. I could work on the blade and the blade etching, and I could also work on the handle, on the scales. I think I pulled it off pretty well. So this video is really just going to go over those two aspects of making this knife. I started with one of my standard AEBL stainless steel chef blanks. And what I've done here is I took a sketch of the Oregon sinking, which was found in Frank Leader's magazine from the late 1800s. And I had a local graphic artist convert that to a very dark silhouette type image that would be usable to be cut out in one of the craft cutting machines. I use a Silhouette Cameo craft cutting machine. This is really pushing the limits of that machine. The detail on this etch really pushed that machine to its limits. After the self-adhesive vinyl was attached to the blank, I then used a little razor knife and some tweezers to weed out the vinyl. So when you do electro etching, everything that's not covered by vinyl is going to get etched. And everything that's covered by vinyl will remain shiny. I etch stainless steel with a 12-volt car battery charger set at 2 amps. I use an electrolyte solution, and I wrap gauze around a etching plate. The solution that I use for stainless is really just white wine vinegar mixed with salt. And I etch for 2 to 3 minutes, but I do it in 10 to 20 second increments, and I let there be some cooling time in between. I never want that knife blank to get hot enough where that self-adhesive vinyl is going to lose its adhesion. I can also get some additional texture by laying a piece of material or gauze and etching through that without moving it. It would end up getting the lines from that gauze. This particular etch is kind of neat because it's really like a 3-tone etch. If you look at it very carefully, you've got one darkness for the ship, you've got another darkness for the water, and another shade of gray for the clouds and the sunrise. So even though it looks fairly simple, a lot of thought and a lot of time went into getting that artwork to a point where it could be cut out, and I could accomplish this. It's probably the most detailed etching I've done to date. So anyway, when you're done etching, you remove the vinyl. Sometimes it because of the heat, it kind of sticks a little bit, and then you clean it up. I using a 400 grit paper here just to give it a quick cleanup, and that's the first time you can really get a look as to what the final blade etching is going to look like. And thank goodness I was very pleased with the etching. I think Rob's gonna like it. So next we're gonna move on to the handles. Rob sent me some ornate brass buttons and some glass beads that he recovered from the cargo from the ship. He also sent me some shipwreck recovered wood. I believe it's teak. Now, I tried a couple of different combinations. I even laid them over the top of a shipwreck chart poster. I just couldn't figure out what would look good. I sent all of those shipwreck artifacts to Brad Hunt from Bradford Hunt Designs, and he made these beautiful knife scales, or scale material. It's clear resin, and he cast the buttons and the beads on top of the shipwreck chart poster. So I'm not sure how the finished product's going to look. The handle on this particular knife is not all that big, but I'm going to try to incorporate and get the image of the Shipwreck from the poster, as well as some of the beads and certainly some of the button into each side of the handle. Now I glued it onto black liners, and then my process of putting handles or putting scales on a fixed blade knife is I clamp one side into position with epoxy. Once the epoxy is dry, I can trim the size, not perfectly, just getting rid of the majority of the excess material. And I do this so I don't have to grind away all that material later. It's just a little bit easier to cut it now. And then I use the pre-drilled holes, pinholes that are through the blank, as my drill guide to drill through the first side of the handles. And then I basically just repeat that process. So it takes me a little bit longer probably to do it this way, but it does give me the ability to perfectly line up each side one at a time to get that forward edge perfectly lined up, and to get the handles, basically exactly where I want them to be. Now, before I glue up the other set, I'm just going to trim down the handle material on the one side. I don't usually do this. I didn't have to do this, but I was kind of anxious to get a look as to what the knife was going to look like, with this scale material that Brad Hunt made up for me. I really think that Brad knocked this one out of the park. I've always been impressed with his work. He's done a lot of knife handles for me. He just does some beautiful work, but this one in particular just really fits the bill. So now I'm going to repeat the process. I glued the other side of the scales on. Once that glue was dry, I'm going to go back to the bandsaw and just trim off a little bit of the extra material so I don't have to grind it away. I'm going to go back to the drill press. I'm going to use the pre-drilled holes through the first side and the blank as the drill guide. I'm keeping that those handles nice and flat against a backer board so there's no blowout on the other side. And then I can glue the pins into position. And once the pins are dry, then I can go over to the 2x72 and start finishing work on the handles. Now I have a Origin blade maker, 2x72. Mine is has a 2 horsepower variable speed. So to do the rough profiling on these handles, I usually use a very coarse grit. For this one, I think I used a 60 grit. I didn't want to go too fine. I wasn't sure how I was going to grind through the glass beads, without causing too much heat and without cracking. So a little bit of a learning curve. I did frequently cool it in water. And they really didn't take, that long to profile. More just a matter of me just being a little extra careful with them. So horizontally, I just like to get rid of all the handle material until the handle matches up with the steel, with the tang. And then I'll go vertical to get rid of those horizontal lines. And I'll go down, from the 60 to an 80, and then a 120, and then a 240. The regular process that I would use for any of my knife handles. Once that's done, I'm going to start to actually create the curves on the handle, and especially along that top edge, right on the flat platen of the 2x72. I'll also use the wheels at the bottom of the platen to start to curve in the inner edge of those handles. Now you can do this a variety of different ways. I used to use it with an angle grinder and a flap sanding wheel. You could certainly do it with files. There's a bunch of ways of doing it. I like to use the 2x72. It's just a very versatile machine. I'm not finishing the handle sanding here, but I'm removing the bulk of the material. Now after removing the bulk, I'll then go to an oscillating sander, with a 220, and then go to a 400, a 600, 1000, and then I will hand sand down to 2000 grit. I find that hand sanding down to 2000 really makes the polishing go a lot faster. And a lot of times I will end up polishing the handles and finding a couple of scratches, deeper scratches, so I may have to back up and go back to that 400 grit and then restart the process. It's much faster the second time around when you're just getting rid of one or two, small scratches. Then over to the buffing wheel with some compound, and these Alumilite clear resin scales really polish up very nicely. This is the finished product of the scales. So you can see they're completely translucent. You can see the Shipwreck chart poster in the background with the image of the RMS Oregon. You can see some of the glass beads and the brass buttons, and of course the very detailed blade etching. So anyway, this is how I pulled off a consignment order for a Shipwreck themed chef's knife. Very, very detailed electro etched blade, actually a three-tone etching, and Alumilite scales, the material created by Bradford Hunt Designs, with artifacts that were supplied by the customer. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up. I would absolutely love to hear comments back. Either way, whether you liked it or you didn't. I'd like to give you an invite to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. And if you're interested in creating your own knives, take a look at the book that Jason Northgard and I put out last year called Introduction to Knife Making, and that can be found on Amazon.com. Thank you very much.